Hi everyone. I was minding my own business when I was contacted by a fellow car enthusiast. He explained that he had recently bought a 24-valve V6 XM and it has a huge internal leak that is probably caused by a leaking DIRAVI. He also mentioned a few other issues he would like me to take a look at, but more on that later. We negotiated for a bit and came to agreement that once I'm in my vacation, I order the seal kit for the DIRAVI, and as soon as it arrives, I jump into the train and take the ferry to Estonia. As I share some footage of my trip to my destination, I would like to say that this video is more of a how I do fault finding with hydraulic system in general. Because the issue wasn't actually a leaking DIRAVI, even though it first seemed like it. I didn't have much time to enjoy the scenery, because I was on a tight schedule, but Tallinn is a really beautiful city. Once I arrived at my destination, I was greeted by an impressive car collection. Not only Citroëns, but many other interesting cars as well. This is one of the rarest and, in my opinion, the best interior for the C6. And here is my patient sitting next to a really gorgeous GSA. And of course the XM refused to start. Now that wasn't all that surprising, because one of the other things was a dodgy ignition module. And while I'm here, I might as well replace the DC cap and the rotor. The contacts inside the cap are quite corroded, but they are far from being the worst that I've seen. Of course, one of the rotor bolts stripped, and I'm not gonna lie, that made me sweat a bit. But maybe praying to André helped, and I managed to get that thing loosened with the vice grips. The new rotor is in place, and I usually don't like to use the Phillips screws that these are shipped with, but this time shall be the exception. Now that the XM is once again up and running, I can start tinkering with the hydraulics. Before I start my diagnosis, let's get everyone to the same page. The owner of this car has diagnosed already that the XM is returning huge amounts of LHM from the return line number 4. So much so that the pump cycles every few seconds and the DIRAVI is struggling because it's not getting the power that it needs. Now I'm going to reveal one of the other issues that the owner mentioned, because it plays a key part on this saga. He said that shortly after turning off the engine, the rear end slams to the ground. By the way, I'm going to link this picture to the description, because the official Citroën workshop manual has return lines 5 and 6 wrong way around. I have also added return lines for the rear electrovalve, but I don't know if it's the same for all the Hydractive 2 XMs. So the car is now idling, and this is the return line from the DIRAVI, the front height corrector and the security valve. Clearly the issue here is not the DIRAVI. This line goes to the reservoir and is returned from the front suspension cylinders. And this line is returned from the rear height corrector, suspension cylinders and the rear electro valve, but I didn't know it at that time. I thought that surely one of the suspension cylinder seals has failed spectacularly and is pouring out LHM, but no. Okay, the last thing connected to the circuit is the height corrector. Also I thought. After confirming that the leak is not coming from the height corrector either, I was clueless. You see, this is the hydraulic diagram for the V6XM, and I have highlighted in green the circuit in this subject. As you can see that the return is only shared with the suspension cylinders and the height corrector. But then it struck me, since this is a Hydractive 2 car, what if this circuit is also shared with the rear electrovalve? For some reason, as far as I know, there is no hydraulic diagram for the Series 2 or Hydractive 2 XMs. Therefore, I searched this section from the Series 2 parts catalog and voila! The rear electrovalve is returning to the same circuit. The rear electrovalve is located at the rear center sphere leg, and in order to get access you need to remove the exhaust and the exhaust heat shield if that's still kicking around. I'm not gonna show all the fighting with the exhaust, but prepare to have the time of your life. I always try to not break anything, but usually with the exhaust bolts that's just eventual. This is how much I'm enjoying this. I managed to get the exhaust out, and now I have access to the center sphere leg. The Knipex pliers like these are the real MVP in situations like these. After I have knocked those flare nuts loose, I use penetrating oil and work them back and forward to make sure that they aren't biting to the hydraulic lines. To get the center sphere leg out, I had to remove the anti-roll bar and the bracket for the leg. All the other hydraulic lines came off easily, but that rear 3.5mm one wasn't having it. Luckily, it's connected to the height corrector, so I can undo that from there. After a bit of waffle, the Hydractive regulator is coming out. Before removing the electro valve, I'll clean the area as usual. I'm attempting to remove this electrovalve with this 16mm socket. It should come off fairly easily because the electrovalve itself is assembled with thread locker. Nice. And here's our issue. A completely torn O-ring. And there's rest of the O-ring. I took another electrovalve out of a spare Xantia just to dismantle it and see what's inside. As I said earlier, the electrovalve is assembled with a thread locker, so it can and will be tight. If you want, you can cook it in the oven for a bit to soften the thread locker. I didn't bother to bake it because I'm not a baker, I'm just a dodgy repairman. Here's evidence of the old thread locker and an O-ring. Next to come off is the coil protector. Then the coil can be removed. Under the coil there is a thicker washer and spring washer. Inside the electrovalve body there is a bigger spring, sort of a seat or a piston, needle and a smaller spring. There is a small piece of the old O-ring between the spring and the needle. Sometimes, due to the age, electrovalves start going in and out sport mode and do all other interesting things. It can be caused because the smaller spring is shorter than it used to, so I spread it ever so slightly. I give a quick clean to the filter at the base. Now I'm cleaning the old thread locker from the return side. Here are the measures of the old O-ring, and as usual it's an odd size. I have two O-rings close to that size, so let's see if one of them fits. After a quick test fit, both of those seals broke, so I'll be using the old seal from the electrovalve that came off the Xantia. The vise made a small bind mark to the base, so I'm going to file it down. The correct size for those green O-rings are 1.45 mm by 7.1 mm internal and 1.5 mm by 18.3 mm internal. So get the closest matching set. For example, I think I used for the bigger one 1.78 mm by 17.17 mm. After a quick test fit, everything seems to be okay, so I can start reassembling the electrovalve, and it goes as Haynes says. Now would you look at that, the axle doesn't leak anymore and it seems to be holding the pressure really well. The inlet line was clearly loose and the pump was sucking air through it. I replaced it with an ordinary hose clamp. Now let's add some protective diodes to this Hydractive ECU. Disconnect the two plugs and undo those two bolts. The Hydractive 2 has a really well-known issue that over time the diodes at the electrovalve coil will fail. To prevent that, it's highly recommended to add protective diodes for both electrovalves. The ECU can be opened by undoing 4 torque screws and the ECU covers are glued together, so gently cut it open with a razor blade. Here is the ECU and pins number 1 and 2 are for the electrovalves and the number 8 is the ground. The ideal would be to fit new protective diodes as close to the electrovalves as possible, but I like to add them straight to the ECU, mainly because it's easier and most of all looks better. If the camera would focus, you maybe can see that every connector is numbered at the socket end. The soldering on that one solid-state relay looks a bit iffy to me, so I'll be resoldering that as well. I quickly scraped off the lacquer. People use 2 types of diodes for this mod. Use the bigger ones if you are going to do it to the wiring. I'll be using these smaller ones. And here is how it should look. And take a note that the cathode end is going to the electrovalves. And seal the deal with Hydractive blue. Time for the click counter. I'll include some photos of the rest of my trip at the end of this video. At the very end, there is a video of me rambling in Finnish because I didn't believe that the space Xantia still had the pressure in the system, and I cut the hydraulic lines with an angle grinder. LHM sprayed all over me, but you know, I enjoy green showers more than golden ones. Thanks for watching. Se on makia homma, kun alkaa rälläkällä leikkailemaan noita painelinia ja irti ja luottaa siihen, että tuon näköinen Xantti, että sillä ei enää ole paineita järjestelmässä, niin rälläkällä kun leikkaat semmosen putken auki, niin sieltä alkaa tulla 70 parin painella sitä tavaraa, niin jumalauta, että mies on aivan lehemässä.